Welcome to TraVision, and on this particular platform it's called Trav Talk. It's going to be one of many different platforms, and we hope to bring near to you. TraVision isn't just TV, radio, podcasting. TraVision aims to deal with, on a level platform with various other communities. It's everybody's side of the story. TraVision will open to all communities, including many platforms of all kinds of political debates. We also, in time, would expect to hold a leader debate or other political platforms. So please go to YouTube channel TraVision. It's a short intro video and TraVision, whatever TraVision could be. You can also see and support by subscribing on TraVision channel by clicking on the subscribe link. And please remember that TraVision will create various platforms for all people and for all various backgrounds. And we will work together from the bottom, because regardless of lack of formal education or their specialised education, or regardless of perspective or topic of any complexities, we can break them down to size, because it's just mind over matter. And we bring thousands of years of culture, oral history with us. So it's really, and I hope, it only with your support of course, so whatever input you can give, TraVision would be something very special, I believe. And by getting involved, it's also you who will make TraVision that bit more special. Now, let me introduce you to my guests. Any of you guys nervous? Petrified?
No.
You should be. Okay. Martin Collins, director of Paddy Point, also Irish traveller, and we will be speaking to him on various different topics, of course. Also, we have Vincent Brown, a well-known journalist who recently retired, and also is to reveal tonight on the show that he's actually an Irish traveller. Kathleen Lawrence, the woman on the hill, and I don't mean Salt Hill or Harmony Hill, I'm talking about the hill in Washington in DC. So, welcome to the show, folks.
Thank you.
Now, one of the things I wanted to get out straight off, because it's something that it's going to haunt us for some time to come. It's also still a very live danger. That was the whole situation around Carrick Mines, and particularly the ruling. Now, unless the chip pan was designed, assembled, and manufactured in Dunleary, Rathdown County Councils, there was absolutely no way to pin that on a chip pan, because the chip pan did cause the fire, but there had been a history of outcries from that particular family, campaigning and lobbying from that particular family on national radio, looking for help, highlighting the inequalities that were living in the situation. So first I'm going to go to Martin and just ask him his thoughts and his feelings on the ruling.
Well, I think it's an absolute scandal, but I think people must remember it wasn't just the inquest verdict last week where it was dead by misadventure. In fact, it was last August, and some people tend to forget this. The DPP decided that there would be no criminal charges brought against Dunleary Rathdown County Council, which I find absolutely incredible. Those families, the Lynches, the Gilberts and the Connors, were left to languish on an emergency temporary site for a long number of years, I think from 2008 until 2015, when the tragedy occurred. And under the Housing Acts, as I understand, because it was an emergency temporary site, Dunleary Rathdown County Council were not obliged to make sure that the site met the health and safety standards and the fire regulation standards. I find that really deplorable.
Did you say there's a connection? I mean, making Vincent all on it.
Can I just finish that point? The bottom line for me, Bernie, is I think there is blood on the hands of Dunleary Rathdown County Council. If I was a landlord and I rented out a property to a family that didn't meet the health and safety standards, didn't meet the fire regulation standards, and a tragedy occurred in that house or apartment that I rented out, I would imagine I would be personally liable and criminal charges would be brought against me, and rightly so. In this case, Dunleary Rathdown County Council were the landlord, they provided the site, and they charged rent for the site. But they didn't meet the health and safety standards and the fire regulation standards, and 10 people
What does that mean
perished.
exactly, when they didn't meet who didn't meet them?
Dunleary Rathdown County Council, under the Housing Acts, because it was defined and had a status of a so-called temporary emergency site, even though the travellers were left to languish there for many years, I think from 2008 to 2015. Now that's 7 years. Now I don't know what definition of temporary Dunleary or Rathdown County Council adopts, but certainly that wouldn't be my definition of a temporary site, 7 years.
All right, let me ask Vincent. Vincent, do you see a connection in some way between what happened in Stardust, Greenfields and Carrick Mines? Is there a connection there in some way that you might elaborate or talk about or mention?
I hadn't thought about that before, but there probably is a connection, all right. But just to take up the point Martin was making, I think that independently of the Act on temporary dwellings, there was what's called a fiduciary duty on the part of Dunleary County Council to look after the welfare of the people that were residing on their site. And yes, the Act might seem to give them a pass on that one, but I think the law, the common law, would mean that the duty still applied to Dunleary Council. The main issue here is these people were living in appalling conditions, and had they not been living in appalling conditions, the tragedy wouldn't have happened. And of course, all around the country, travellers are living in appalling conditions, and others, apart from travellers, living in appalling conditions. And we, as members of a society which is one of the richest in the world, have easily the capacity, the economic capacity to deal with all of these problems if there was a political will. And the problem is there isn't a political will.
There seems to be a political will in the opposite direction. There seems to be a lot of blocking and stopping and anti-travellerism. So there is a willingness to go out that far.
Oh, there is a separate problem to do with prejudice against the traveller community, and that's now almost part of the DNA of what would be called the settled community in this country. I took a taxi so that I would be on time for this recording.
And you seem excited about it. Go on.
And the taxi man, the issue of travellers came up, and he spoke from the perspective of a large number of people, inferring that every member of the traveller community was guilty of antisocial behaviour, that they couldn't bother be finding jobs for themselves, they were job shy, that they were living off the rest of the community. In other words, the kind of attitude exemplified by Peter Casey in the presidential debate. And there is a problem with this, and the travel community and the society as a whole have got to consider, well, how are we going to deal with this prejudice? And I don't think that either the community as a whole, or indeed the travel community, has adequately thought through how this prejudice can be alleviated, because that is the source of a lot of the problems experienced by the travel community. Okay,
I'll quickly remind you that although you are retired from tonight with Vincent Brown, this is a completely different setup. So when I call the shots here, when I tell you calm down, you just put it back with this. I feel good about that now. Kathleen, I was going to ask you, right, and again, keeping the Carrick Mine situation for a minute, because it all interconnects. I'm pretty certain you were present there at the time with the aftermath, the support of the family, the media attention they got. Yeah. Could you tell us what was your thoughts on how the media portrayed that there and after, and particularly again on the ruling, how the media had focused on certain aspects which were quite irrelevant to the bigger context of things?
I'll be honest with you, especially around the time, I was infuriated the same way a lot of travellers were, devastated at the same time that 10 people lost their lives, including a woman who was pregnant as well. So the fact basically that 10 people died, and if you equated that to the settled community, it would have been like a national outcry. 4 young boys died here the other day in a car crash. 4 young boys had their whole lives ahead of them, right? And that's what you heard. That's what you heard about them. That these 4 young boys, their lives were cut short. And it's a terrible tragedy that he died. But yet, when you heard in the media about travellers and about the 10 travellers who died in the Carrick Mines tragedy, there was none of that. There was no look at all the life we had ahead of them. There was no talk about how the likes of a 6-month-old baby who never had a start at life. There was no talk about how their lives were tragically cut short. It was all about basically travellers problem again. The fact that they were living on a temporary site, right, as has been said already, yet the site was there for many years as a temporary site, and the residents had to pay a rent. There was electricity and stuff provided, yet the council could not provide basic safety measures for them that would have prevented that tragedy.
I'll tell you something, it seemed to me it was almost recognisable as a halting site till to the point it would have got to the fire, and then they de-recognised it. Because as you said, they're paying rent, electricity and all that. Now, just something Vincent mentioned a minute ago, you were saying, Vincent, the travellers are inadequate to get themselves out of the situation, or?
About that.
I thought you were talking
one of the requirements of presenters is that they listen to what their panelists are saying.
I'm only winging it. This is my first time.
What?
It's my first time.
You should try listening to people. That's a good idea.
All right.
Oh yeah.
I'm pretty certain when I go back and replay, you did say something to that effect. I think we were saying with travellers and never mind. We'll come back to you in a minute with that.
What he had said was that both the settled community and the travellers have not considered just how much we can try and reduce the fear basically on both sides. I'm paraphrasing what you kind of said.
Prejudice.
Yeah, the prejudice, sorry. That when you look at the prejudice basically, that we talk about the problems, we talk about how there is prejudice, and obviously based on the conversation that he had with the taxi driver, it's obviously that perception is there of travellers. So we have to actually put an awful lot of thought into how we actually reduce that prejudice and try and get both communities to come together.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because there seems to be quite a lot of work on in there. Vincent, if you were to describe to the audience what is the media, who is the media, how it operates, because in some ways it's almost like political parties at this stage. If you look at America, you see Fox News for one political party, CNN for the other political party. Does that happen in Ireland?
No, it's not as obvious in Ireland, but nonetheless the media does reflect the prejudices and the mindsets of our society as a whole, and as well as to a large extent forming the mindsets. And I think that what has been done by television particularly in regard to travellers has deepened the prejudice of the community as a whole against travellers. For instance, in TV3 as it was, the broadcast of programmes like Big Fat Gypsy Wedding and other so-called documentary programmes on travellers all belittled or were scornful of travellers, and in my opinion contributed significantly to the prejudice that exists in society at large. I think that's true generally of the print media and the other broadcast media as well.
Martin, you're no stranger to the media. You've been in it quite a while. Actually, one of the interesting things I read years ago was there was a quote by an Irish settled person. I think it was in the 80s. You were protesting, and they were saying everything was fine till Martin Collins came around looking for equality. And that statement, I also read that in somewhere in the 1960s, where they were saying something about African American leaders. Same thing. Nothing has much changed over the last 2 or 3 decades in terms of media. When is it hostile, when it's not?
Well, I think generally speaking, it is. It's a form of institutionalised racism. Now, I know there are some exceptions here and there, but I'm speaking in the overall scheme of things. In both print and broadcast. I think journalists at the end of the day and broadcasters are people. They're human beings, and quite often, a lot of them will carry their own prejudice and their own stereotypes into their work. And they will use their privileged platform to espouse or articulate or reinforce racism and prejudice. We've seen that during the Peter Casey campaign with some broadcasters as well. And not just in relation to the Peter Casey presidential campaign, but it's an ongoing issue, where journalists, as I say, use a very privileged platform. And I think really what it highlights, and this goes back to Vincent's point, and it's not about censoring, and it's not about curtailing free speech. Free speech is really important, and it's a cornerstone of our democracy. But free speech is not an absolute right. In other words, it doesn't give you the right to incite hatred or violence. And that brings me to the substantive point, if you like. We don't have strong, effective hate speech legislation in this country, where if somebody incites hatred or violence, you can seek redress or you can hold them to account. Yeah. And that's a big gap. That's a lacuna, as they say, in our law.
Could I follow through on that? In the presidential election campaign...
I'll tell you what, Vince, just before you go, I just want to go to Kathleen first. I'm going to come back into that,
Okay.
right? Kathleen, Martin had mentioned Peter Casey, very hot topic there for a while in the media. I believe that you've put some questions to him on the Late Late Show, Ryan Tuberty Show. Have you spoken to this person in person?
I haven't spoken to them in person. Obviously, I was in the audience.
Well, tell me what you think of his thought process in terms of Travers.
I can't speak to his thought process because obviously
Yeah.
that's his own. I don't know how he reached those conclusions and stuff.
Yeah.
But the effect of it was that Travers felt even more isolated. In fact, you have this person who was seeking to become president of Ireland, a president for all the people, and yet he used that platform to pick on one of the most vulnerable communities in society, right? And while I don't think that his entire leap in his percentage came from his perception of Travers, but a good bit of it did, because the fact that he went from 1% to 21% said an awful lot about the situation in Ireland, and a lot of that has got to do with the media, as it has been said. It's got a lot to do with basically lack of a strong hate campaign policy, anti-hate speech policy, and just the way that certain politicians have even spoken about Travers, people in power. So when you have people in power speaking about Travers in such a negative way, and then you expect people on the street then who may not have met Travers but are going by what other people have said of their perception. And so then
Travers is almost part of everyday political life now, isn't it? It's been going on for years, decades, politicians have been doing that. But also now, just bringing it back into Vincent for a second, on Peter Casey, all right? His initial interview, he had lashed out at homeless people in general. It's when he got pulled up on it, he reverted to the Tipperary situation, and then it became all about Travers. The media escaped the part where he lambasted every other person in accommodation, an emergency accommodation, but then made it all about Travers, politicians, and that's when the political race became almost anti-Travers. First time in history, I believe, became an anti-Travers political campaign.
I don't recall his comments about homeless people, I just recall his comments about Travers. But in the presidential debate that occurred on Virgin Media 1, formerly TV3, Pat Kenny was the presenter, and he challenged Peter Casey on his views on Travers at the outset of the programme. But then Pat Kenny went on to ask each member of the panel, would they be happy if a Traveller family moved in next door to them? And in my opinion, and it is an opinion obviously, this was a racist question. And if I could illustrate that by pointing out that had he asked, would you be happy if a black family moved in next door, or if a Jewish family moved in next door? In either of those two cases there would have been outrage. In this instance, there was not a single commentary that I came across with regard to this. And I think that there's issues to do with this, quite apart from Pat Kenny, is to do with, again, the attitude we have towards Travers in society, that a whole community can be demeaned by a question on a presidential debate and nobody pays any attention or makes any protest, including, by the way, the Travers community.
Well, what's interesting is about that, right? And it is come down to hegemony and kind of people's own definition of ideologies and so on and so forth. But if you look at the systems in Ireland where Irish settlement people have been operating for the last 100 years, them systems were pretty much designed by the British. Whether it be the political system, the legal system, the landlord system, the education system, were all British systems that were brought to Ireland. And they were the same systems, same kind of ideologies that had killed many of our ancestors. So far as I can see it, is that them systems are still in operation with people with different accents using them, because the same systems are still killing Travers, as the same way they were over 100 years ago. Would that be fair to say, Mark?
Well, I was out in Clondalkin in Balgally there on the 11th of January, where 5 Travers families comprising of 28 children, they were being threatened with eviction from South Dublin County Council. And they had a private security firm and the guards were there and so forth. But anyway, with the presence of Travers organisations and the media, it didn't take place. But I was struck, by, evictions in a context where local authorities have both failed to implement their travel accommodation programs since they were introduced in 1999. They have failed to draw down the allocated funding for travel accommodation. And in that context, for those local authorities to be carrying out evictions, I think it's immoral and it's inhumane, and it should not be allowed. And in that context, I did say that, to go back to your history lesson, as it were, I think Cromwell would be very proud of us. You know, the guy who evicted many Irish travel families, or many families from their homes, dispossessed from their farms, you know, to Heather Connacht or wherever else. But of course, Travers took another option, and that option was the road. But you know, I just think overall in that context, I do think it's incredibly immoral for evictions to be taking place in that context. But I just go back to Carrickmines tragedy. I think Kathleen raised some really good points, you know, in relation to that tragedy in Donegal, 4 young people, and how that's been portrayed, and the narrative around that. And it's right that it should be in the way that Kathleen spoke about. It's very sensitive, you know. But when you compare that, you're absolutely right, Kathleen. I never thought of it in that way. When you look at the tragedy in Carrickmines, it's a different narrative. People are vilified and ridiculed and blamed for being in that situation. And that's where the injustice, I think, comes in. But also when you look at the Carrickmines tragedy and 10 people in our community dying in one tragic event, as I said before, that's the equivalent of 1,500 settled people dying in one tragic event. If that were to happen, now that's the scale of the tragedy. If that were to happen, there would be a national emergency and 2 days of mourning.
Well, this is the interesting about it, is because very little has changed since that. And I can tell you that my niece, who grew up in a house, and she moved to Dublin, she had to live in a caravan, and then ended up 7 or 8 weeks in intensive care because her caravan was on fire, and she was lucky to escape it. This is just before Christmas. So there doesn't seem to be that progression where you either go up as a traveller, you move into a house and you go that way, or you find alternative suitable accommodation. You go up in a house as a traveller and still throw into the third world living condition site. And these are the things that sorry.
Yeah, but just go back. I'll go back to Vincent's point, and I think it's a really important one. You know, and I feel okay making comparisons to other ethnic groups and other communities, because whether we like it or not, and I know some people don't like it, there is a hierarchy. There is. And we're at the very bottom of that pecking order.
It's also a
pyramid
scheme.
And I think it's the last bastion of racism, you know, that is experienced by our people. You know, both at the individual level, the structural level, the institutional level, and I think this racism permeates all structures of society, whether it's the education system, whether it's the church, whether it's the media, the political system. That is the reality, and we are at the lower end of the pecking order.
Ask Kathleen, as an Irish traveller woman, what's that like in everyday life? I know you've secured some pretty decent education, some degrees in law and sociology, I believe. That has to be an advantage, has it?
Well, so you have to look at the fact basically that I grew up between England and Ireland, so I travelled back and forth a good bit. But a lot of my education was in Ireland, that I can remember obviously, and that has been majority negative. I was bullied by teachers, I was bullied by students, I was discriminated against in those systems. I left school at 15 with no qualifications, right? I actually, when I was in school, I did well. Because I enjoyed it. And I didn't do too badly because I enjoyed the learning itself. But the whole experience was very isolating. I was made to feel like I didn't belong. So I left school at 15. I spent the next number of years then doing little courses here and there, certificates here and there, to try and build up some kind of a proof of education, that the fact that I had some kind of learning behind it. And it wasn't until I started working in Pavey Point that I was encouraged to go to university. It never occurred to me before that was even an option for any travellers.
That's good.
And I, after much convincing, I decided to apply. And I was the first of almost 200 cousins on both sides to ever go to college that I know of. As I said, there's a lot of them, so it's
well, actually, my own daughter's going to college now, and she's the first in our family. So
and it's a great thing. But yet, when I got there, while I had some very supportive lecturers and stuff like that, I still experienced discrimination in a different way. Because when people find out you're a traveller, every time a traveller does something negative, they come and tell me about it, as if somehow I was going to be able to solve that situation, or we're going to be able to explain it away to them.
Yeah,
as if I can speak for everybody.
It is that kind of thing where settled people are seeing themselves as individuals, and they're adamant to be seen as individuals. But when it comes to travellers, they've got to see us collectively, no matter how individual we might be. Now, just before I go to finish up, I'm going to leave anyone any last words you'd like to add?
Well, yeah, I do. Just go back to your comment earlier on, and I've read that quote. I forget where it's from. There wasn't a problem until I came along, which I just find incredibly ridiculous. I mean, I was born in 1966, and I didn't get involved in the Traveller struggle until around 1985. And for anybody to suggest that prior to 1985 there were no issues of injustice or racism
but you made it worse.
I made it worse than but I think it's a classic response, you know, from the oppressor. You know, you're grand when you're subservient and when you're passive, you know, but as soon as you begin to articulate and resist and try and organise, then you blame the community. And that's classic right across the globe in terms of all struggles.
Another thing I've often noticed is that,
you know, stay quiet.
that if you see a situation, say in America, Black Lives Matter and all that, we can see it, right? Because first of all, we can recognise what most groups like that. But we can see from Ireland how an injustice is done. We can see it in Australia, we can see it in other parts of the world. We can see it in Israel. In Palestine with the Israel occupation. But when it comes to Ireland, settled people cannot see it in the same way other people can see it from different perspectives in different countries. Same way as I suppose Protestants north and there is that kind of ideological base where they cannot see it before them, their own doings as such.
I think a part of that, in my opinion, a part of that is the fact that to some settled people, because we're white, because we don't look any different, because we don't have a fluent different language. Obviously we do have a different language, but people almost like, what's the difference between travellers and the normal settled person? How comes you just can't be like us? They don't take into account there's different culture, traditions. There is a language. Fair enough, I'm not fluent in it, but there is a language there. There's a whole different history there, and because they don't see that, all of a sudden they can't separate the two. So because we're not distinct enough for them. That's my opinion.
Vincent, any last words? Any kind of views you might?
Just Catherine put in mind a incident or a practice I was taught about in a girls' school in the Midlands. It was run by nuns, and this would have been 25 years ago or so. And the travellers who attended the class, a class in this school, were put at a separate table in the middle of the classroom. And when any of the other girls got into trouble or did something wrong, the punishment was to put them on the same table as the travellers. And just think of what that did to the minds of the other girls in the school, that the worst thing that could happen to you would be to put you sitting beside a traveller. And that's of course how prejudice persists and is reinforced.
Okay, well look, I'd like to say thank you very much to Martin Collins, Vincent Brown and Kathleen Lawrence. I'm delighted to come on, and this is just the beginning of TraVision. I'm hoping to do a multitude of different platforms, but also projects, documentaries, in where we can look at the issues, address the issues and come up with solutions. Folks, thank you very much for coming on.
You're welcome.
Welcome to back to part 2 of TraVision, and this particular platform is called Trav Talk, and we're joined with a second round of guests who are Patrick Nevin, our Irish traveller, works with the Talent Traveller group. We also have Margaret Cash, our equivalent to Rosa Parks, and we also have the multi-talented, world-renowned journalist Kitty Holland. So first of all, thank you for coming on the show, folks. And that intro, that was a fair description?
Well renowned, I don't think so.
Yeah, well, stop giving me cards if you don't want me to read them out. Kitty Holland, I'll start with you this time, right? Because you come from a multitude of different perspectives, and that's a very rare thing in anyone, particularly journalists. And I say that because you are the journalist, you have been in the news, you've been on the other side of the news, you've been with the people who've been in the news, you've been in some of the worst circumstances, situations, and you've seen a multitude of people at their most volatile, vulnerable situation. How the hell does that feel?
Well, could you give me some examples?
Well, as a journalist, you're a journalist, you
Yeah.
become friends with a lot of people that you've been working with.
Yeah,
You see
yeah.
that it's quite evident in your work. But how does it feel to be the journalist, to be the friend, to report the news?
Well, I suppose I was once asked on a Vince Brown show by someone who was
Who?
campaigning for the pro-life
I
campaign.
heard him.
Was I being a journalist or was I being a campaigner? And I wish I'd had the presence of mind to say I hope it can be both, because I do see journalism as a really privileged position to be in, and as it's a privileged platform that you shouldn't waste, and you have an immense power as a journalist. And I suppose I grew up in a household with two very left-leaning, socially conscious parents, Mary Holland and Eamon McCann, and from them I suppose I have a perspective where when I see inequality and injustice and how the system, and it usually is structural and systemic, when people are in situations of poverty, or where they're losing loved ones, or where they're in really difficult situations through no fault of their own. I do believe that has to be called out. And maybe people I meet see that in me, because I do tend to stay in touch with people and, as you say, become friends with them. And people may say that that's blurring the lines of journalism, but I would have to kind of argue and disagree that there has to be a role for journalists who are known and just do take the side of the downtrodden and take the side of people who are really battling a giant, and they're the Davids when they're dealing with the system and dealing with society and dealing with capitalism and all the interests that it's in, when it's in the wider community, wider society's interest to keep people ground down, that needs to be called out.
Very good. Margaret, you're no stranger to the media, are you? It went pretty well, I thought, at the beginning, particularly the very initial part was yourself, your kids in the guard station. And at that particular time, there had been no mention that you were a traveller. And it went local, it went national, it went international, it was global, all over the world. And a certain change happened. Once your identity became relevant to their newsworthy campaignings, everything had changed. It got a bit more nastier, didn't it?
Well, Bernard, I'll tell you the truth, I'm not going to just say it was just because I was a traveller, because, to be honest with you, there's 10,000 people homeless in Ireland.
Right.
And I honestly do believe that it wouldn't have made a difference whether I was a traveller or a settled person. The government tolls were out, and they were going to get anyone who thought to stand up to them. And it wouldn't have made a difference whether who I was or what community I came from. That's the way I feel. Because, like I said, that time people didn't, I don't understand why people never thought that the situation was as bad. This situation has been this way for a very long time.
Is there any update on your current situation now? I should have asked you first, actually, but what's any update at all on your situation?
Well, kind of, yeah. I was called in to the county council the other day, and they told me that there was a house available, but it wasn't a council house. It's still an emergency accommodation. It's transitional house. I'm not good enough to be posh words there. But it's basically it's a house. It's a house before the council give you your own house. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, they said that I'd have to fill in an application form, and then they'd send that away. But because it's not a council house, it's some other agency that owns that property. They'll have to look at the application, see if I'm suitable, like they do with everybody, fill in an application. And then I would, if they said okay, then the council would call me back in. Now I haven't heard 100% yet, and that's why so I'm just waiting on it.
Well, I hope everything will well for you. Patrick, we heard you speaking earlier on about the Carrick Mine situation. I think, again, I could just, if the panel wants to discuss briefly on it, or as long as they want, I don't mind. But I think it's something I think it's very important that we keep bringing up every time, and getting people's opinions and views. The ruling, but even prior to the ruling, travellers have been treated pretty bad. There have been a lot of fires over the country that rarely get reported in the news. Earlier on I mentioned about my niece who was 7 weeks in intensive care, and it's only happened before Christmas. So there are a lot of situations that are not reported. Where do you see a change happening in terms of government change, European change, law change, something that we can tackle the tide of this? So it's state oppression, state violence.
No, I accept it, and it was horrendous in terms of Cork Mines. But just in terms of your question in relation to it, first and foremost, I think the state has to acknowledge that, particularly since '63, since the Commission of Itinerancy, and I keep referencing that because that has been the template for the next, from that period of time right to the present, where there was a direct engagement at a state level of assimilation, absorption, denial, cultural annihilation, refusal to acknowledge and accept the presence of a nomadic people that coexisted with their own culture, their own language, their own internal politics, and had coexisted for generations and indeed millennia, I would say, long before. So the state has in some ways come to some acknowledgement, but they haven't acknowledged.
Well, the ethnicity, that'll be an
Well,
acknowledgement.
it's an acknowledgement of ethnicity, but they never, and they haven't acknowledged the investment that they put into the very effort of assimilation and annihilation. So until they come to an acknowledgement of that and accept, and we're still going to be continuing down this road of where we have the Margarets and we have others, and it's about validation of a culture, it's about acceptance of a culture, and it's about understanding that we're born into who we are as travellers, and we come from a long history of it. I mean, there's references, I can quote them right back to 4th, 5th century AD, but I think it's very pertinent at this time, and in relation to, if we look at the situation across the water and indeed up the road in terms of Brexit, because that's all about identity. And this state, since the 60s, set about in a very sophisticated, very brutal way of denial of the existence of people. And it was only after years of campaigning and pressure, both within the local travel organisations and allies from outside, but also at a European level, that the state finally succumbed and stood up in 2017 and acknowledged ethnicity. But remember this, there is no legal guarantee of protection in relation to ethnicity.
Well, I remember being at the ignition, or recognition, it was ignition, it got me up and started anyway, I can tell you. No, I think, quite honestly, it was an insult of sorts. And I know people take it two ways, or any way they want. They can take that kind of nice feeling of being recognised of who you are. But it's like taking a person with a disability and bringing them into the Dáil and saying to them, we recognise you have a disability, but we are going to do absolutely nothing for you. That's the same as what happened with the recognition. That's my personal opinion.
Well, I would say that I wouldn't necessarily see it like that. I do feel that it was, and it is, an acknowledgement. However, I think there should be an acknowledgement of the previous decades of that annihilation, that cultural annihilation and denial. And that needs to be looked at in the terms of reparations and in terms of...
Well, you're speaking about 1963 report. One of the interesting things about that is that there was a lot of research carried out on the mental well-being of travellers. And it was the 1960s leading up to that report, they found there was little or no mental health issues within the community. They found them in dire living conditions, but they found no mental health issues. So when they initiated that plan, now we've gone to being 7 times higher than national suicide rate.
Yeah, we do. And just in terms of what was said in the earlier discussion and panel, you know, we can look at this in an international context as well. We can look at the Aboriginals in Australia, the Maori of New Zealand, First Nations of Canada, and the Native Americans, or any minority group that has been oppressed and attempted assimilation or cultural denial. There's no doubt that in that 50 years from 63 to the present, that the assimilationist process and the policies that came from that has impacted in the mental health, has impacted in every sense of the word.
Let me see if we can carry that over to Kitty Hanna for a second, right? Because I know Kitty's dad is involved with a lot of political activism. So through that you become quite aware, consciously aware of the class divide. And on this class divide you will have, like the Stardust, like Greenfield Towers, like the Travellers, like direct provisions, like people are home, and so on and so forth. And our biggest issue of conflict seems to be this side among ourselves as opposed to the ruling class as such. How do we break them barriers down? How do we get people on the same platform, so to speak?
Well, I mean, I suppose that's a constant struggle and trying to organise and raise kind of class consciousness amongst different groups of, you know, we're all actually trying to struggle for the same crumbs from the table of the ruling class. But I mean, I just, on the issue of the ethnicity, like, I just increasingly think that was just a meaningless sop to the community. It absolutely meant, it was the easiest do nothing gesture, if you want. And really, I mean, what's needed now, and I think you look back at kind of what happened in the United States in the 1960s and kind of the civil rights movement, legislation is needed now, and you know, nothing less, and legislation that's enforced. You know, so we saw things like how difficult it was in Little Rock to get the black kids into the schools and the Rosa Parks, you know. So this is going to be difficult, uncomfortable, and people are going to fight it, so to say, that racism against travellers has to stop. And the only way I increasingly think that is going to be dealt with is not through nice kind of gestures and recognising ethnicity and cultural days in the village and, you know, Traveller Pride Day and all, as valuable and all as they are, and kind of just, you know, breaking down some of the prejudice. We really need government now to pass legislation that says you provide traveller accommodation, if you don't do it to the local authorities, you will be sanctioned. We stop discrimination against traveller kids in schools, traveller kids who are put on reduced hours or who are expelled for no good reason, that stops. Travellers' access to healthcare has to be provided, and traveller women, they have to be met where they're at. And it just stops, and this needs to be, and politicians who play the anti-traveller card, they can face sanction from their parties. It stops. And and this has to be challenged, and it's the only way we're going to get
quite
this
honestly,
leadership from
how we
state.
challenge them, right? And I see this as almost like patterns at this stage, either from one decade to the next, one century to the next. It seems to be the same things that's going on with different names.
Yeah, so legislation is needed. It's not good enough anymore to say.
I think
it's not very nice to do that, and it's not really, you know, we're going to have some light ethnicity now, and it's all very fuzzy wuzzy.
Well, we're subject to the whims and abuses of the settlement community regardless, because we don't have the political figures in. We have absolutely isolated in every quarter.
But once, you know, if you were to say to local authorities, you know, in Galway now, there's all these people living in squalid conditions, rat-infested sites and everything, that has to be sorted in the next 5 years. And if you don't sort it, Galway City Council, you will face sanctions. And once travellers are in culturally appropriate accommodation, then begin to you know, address other issues like education and employment and all that kind of thing. But, you know, you just have to start facing down the prejudice and racism.
Well, I think hopefully this will be some of the platforms to do this. Because, you know, if we set up like almost like a fact checker in the presence of people who are sprouting off one thing or another, you say, no, actually that's not true, that's a contradictory, that's wrong. You will break people down, because people will see people like that with dim views, dim beliefs being dismantled, other than on ungrounded fears or unsounded fears. So that's where one go. Margaret can't, right? We're planning to have some fun with TraVision, aren't we? Because we're going to set you up with your own show and everything. I promise you that. Because when you went it alone. This time you'll have the company of a TV crew, very expensive one if we get the funding. But you go around, because there's a million people just like you, Margaret, isn't there, on this island, right?
There is, yeah.
They've never got the opportunity to speak up.
Yeah.
Found it difficult to get to the top of the queue. Tell us that exactly people who would love to have something like this and get their story out there.
Well, to be honest now, Bernard, like I said before, I never met this a traveller thing. I did say that right from the start. It can never be a traveller thing for me, because although obviously I have to recognise, as I am a traveller, that there is racism. Like, it's very hard for me to try and find a rented accommodation because no landlord wants to rent that house out to me.
Yeah.
The minute they know I'm a traveller. So in that sense, yes, there is racism. But from another point of view, the government don't care about anyone. There's people dying on our streets that are not travellers, that are belong to them. Their own people, and they're allowing them to die. There's children walking the streets day and night and not knowing where they're going to sleep. They're walking the streets hungry, because you get your door to people that are talking about all over Ireland. You get that. You have to eat out 3 times a day. You have to walk around and try and keep your children dry every single day. You can't drag water around Dublin along with you.
No,
so you're going to without second-hand shops trying to pick up around bits of clothes to keep their children warm. Now, that's not just travellers that's doing that.
Yeah.
That's the whole, every homeless person in Dublin is doing it. Do you know what I mean? So, from a point of view, yeah, we all know that there is racism.
Well, just say if we're set Margaret up, she has her own show, the whole lot. Do you think there'd be a lot more people that were in similar situations like you'd be more comfortable coming on talking to you?
People are afraid, Bernard. I tell you why they're afraid, because they were always afraid. I was afraid. Right? I was afraid. I slept 3 times in the police station, and it was only the last time. I said, no, what? I just can't stick this any longer. Do you know what I mean? But people are afraid, and the reason they're afraid is because of what happened with me. The media will get out every badness, everything you do. I never come out and said I was a saint or anything. Do you know what I mean? I'm not asking for a Satan at all. Do you know what I mean? Like, all I'm asking for is an old home for my old children. So, like, what does your past have to do with being an Irish citizen wanting to get an old home?
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with it. But people are afraid. They are afraid, but that's what people need to learn. You have to swallow your pride as well as a traveller. A lot of travellers don't. They're ashamed to come out there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you have to swallow that pride. You have to come out, you have to talk, you have to let people know what's going on. Do you know what I mean? And the same with second people. They're afraid of the bad media. They're afraid of everything. Do you know what I mean? You're either going to live like this forever, or you have to get up and talk.
Before I come on to Patrick, just quickly, because I should have answered earlier on, maybe joking I did. As I said, the woman on the panel, do you feel any different? Did you experience any different as you would if you were on another panel with settled people?
No.
No?
No.
I'll tell you why I say that, right? Because well, I can speak for myself, and I'm sure Patrick and Margaret are going to agree with this, and I suppose it's also with other people. But we're on a settled platform. We're usually the one person with 3 or 4 so-called experts and so on and so forth. We're the people that have to defend the whole entire community while trying to talk about a topic or a subject at hand, that kind of thing. So it's almost against a race against the clock. And you were subjected, you were officially or the unofficial ambassador of your community, because no matter what you say, you don't care if you're an individual, you see you as collective.
The media and society does love to blame people for their situation, and that's part, you know. So, like, I interviewed a woman there 2 weeks ago who's living in poverty, really, with her 2 kids. And when I went to talk to her, first she wanted to be anonymous because she was afraid of the backlash. And by the end of the conversation, she was happy to be identified and have a photo taken. And I think it's because together in the conversation we kind of said, this is not your fault. This is because of, you know, lack of childcare.
But I do know that when you're in that situation, like me when I was in that situation, I felt it was my fault. I felt I was the worst mother. Jesus Christ, how can I allow my children? And then, you know what I had said to myself, people are the likes of bowling and all, and they tell you personal responsibility. Excuse yourself. I did take personal responsibility. I went out there and I bought a home, but the only home that I could afford. Yeah. I couldn't afford a house. I afforded a caravan for my children. That was my home. But the authorities wouldn't give me somewhere to put it. So you can't live on the side of the road, but yet they won't give you a house. Where do they expect travellers to go? We're not going to disappear from them. Like. Where do they expect us to go? Like?
And that's the systemic, structural issues that you face. And then the woman I interviewed down in Tullamore, it was lack of childcare, you know, arrears on her mortgage, and all the things she was facing as well. And and society then does tend to look to turn around and blame people. And if they've got a label they can latch onto, like traveller or refugee or Roma, well, even better, because you know there's something inherently wrong with you because you have, you know, you're part of this.
The media can kick it up a notch there also, because you can also just equally go into their own community, and again, the skin picking really, but nevertheless, it could be someone with disabilities, it's a woman, it's a lone parent.
Absolutely, lone parents as well. You know,
they were quite popular back about 20 years ago. The lone parents were flying it, weren't they? They're on the media like blaming them from everything.
But when you're homeless, like, that's what people don't understand in either, right? When you become homeless, like we came homeless, no fault of our own. We were in a private rented accommodation, we had a lease for 5 years. The landlord went bankrupt, the house was seized, and repossessed by the bank. That left us homeless. We didn't break our lease or contract or anything like that. That was no fault of our own, do you know what I mean? And then when we became homeless, it just took so much of a toll on me and my partner. He was blaming me and I was blaming, and now we're separated. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not saying that's the only reason, but there was a very, very big part of it.
Well, this is not something. Again, this is what happens a lot of the times. Is I feel is it becomes a generational thing that we grew up thinking where it just happened to us, and it's up to us. We can deal with it now. But it's actually happened the generation before us, the generation before us, and the goalposts of racism are changing forever. They're more smiley. They don't mind getting their picture taken with you. They'll shake your hand. but there was as racist as the people were back in the 80s. And Patrick, you've seen quite a lot of that through your research.
Yeah.
You've seen even Patrick go back a couple of centuries ago.
That's right.
It's very similar, aren't they?
There is lots of it, but I just want to go back, because again what's been said is absolutely 100% accurate, but I just want to go back to where I started in terms of the Commission itinerancy. And in the previous panel there was a discussion, Vincent mentioned about the segregated classroom where there was a table with young traveller girls and that's where they sat, and every other girl in that class was not to interact or be with them. Part of the Commission on Itinerancy, I mean, the damage that has inflicted on travellers today, we're living with the results. We're living with the actual impact of suicide, mental health, denial of culture, are huge issues. We're living with that. But there is another part of that document and that report was disseminated throughout the entire state to the various institutions of the state, and it was made up, when you look at the makeup of the actual commission, it was made up of the official Ireland at the time, the various churches, the farming associations, the Garda, everything, except having travellers in it involved. That itself, and I've made this repeatedly, and I think others have said it, but I've been quite strong in this, that has pushed the mindset that we've had since the 60s.
Well, one interesting thing is the 1963 report, if you look at it, is almost a replicate of the 1600 report by King James, who forced in the whole social.
Absolutely. Can I just, because it needs to be, because it has never really been dissected,
right,
and it's never been really investigated from that sense.
Well,
how much damage it's also inflicted onto the mindset of the majority white settled Catholic Ireland. But just another point I'd like to say in relation to what Margaret is talking about. At the moment we have 10,000 displaced people in this country inside the actual border of the Republic of Ireland. We have 10,000 displaced people. We've had, when I said about the template, I solidly believe, and indeed there's others like me, other traveller activists and travellers who, and indeed non-travellers, who would say that everything that has happened in the last 10 to 15 years in relation to the downturn and the way grew out of how they desensitised the population in relation to travellers in the previous decades. I have no doubt in my mind that that level of the ostracisation, the comments made at council chambers, the comments made in Dáil chambers, local politicians, local councillors getting elected on the back of an anti-traveller. If you have pushed that agenda for 50 years, you have desensitised the population, and it can open up a can of worms for any other group.
I think there are particular topics that are problems we come back on
Barry, just to keep this going.
We're about to come to the
there's
names.
but there's 10,000, no, like you said, right, there's 10,000 people homeless now. There's a lot of activists and stuff out there, and are like, and 100% like they should do. Don't be selling off our public land to private developers. Yeah, 100%. Build more houses. The fact of the matter is, look, listen, we have not got a housing crisis. We've just got a homeless crisis, which means they pick and choose who can live in a house and who can't. There's over 180,000 houses across the country boarded up. There's 10,000 people homeless. Like that, this government could help. Just fix this homeless crisis. They don't want to fix it. There's nothing in it for them.
Of all the people, if you're okay, and trust me, it's good. Of all the people that cut short, Margaret, unfortunately we're coming to an end. So I will leave one final question with you. But before I do that, I just want to reach out to the public, whoever sees this. For one, we didn't take over RT or TNG or any buildings. This is our own platform. So we're hoping you go to GoFundMe.com and type in TraVision. And there you will help to donate whatever you can afford. It might be as big as Kitty Holland's donation or Vincent Brown's. But whatever you can afford, because I promise you, with good equipment, it'll go for bring us all over the country, and it'll give a multitude of different signs and different stories. And I think that's where we'd like to go. Last question to three. Start with Patrick. 10-year challenge. What would you like to see change in 10 years for travellers?
Well, I'd go back to what Kitty said, because we've been saying it. We need legislation. We need an equivalent of the affirmative action programs that were ran in the States in the 60s, 70s and so forth, and we need it here.
Are you okay robbing your material?
That's fine.
Margaret, what would you like? 10-year challenge, apart from your own show and everything?
Different government. One that actually cares about us.
A different government.
One that actually cares about us.
Okay.
A government that actually can fix.
That could be a lot shorter than 10 years.
No, really, that's what I would love. I'd love if somebody in the Dáil that actually cares about the people of Ireland, instead of like there's people dying on our streets, and that's really annoying. Like I said to you, I'm not going to repeat everything I said,
No,
but
you're right.
there's so much stuff that that they can fix, and they just don't want to fix it. It's really annoying. So yes, somebody who cares about the people of Ireland, get in there and fix all these problems.
Kitty Holly, you're on record, 10-year challenge.
Well, I suppose from the traveller community, I would like to see racism called out and named for what it is, because I just don't think it's named enough. It's not anti-traveller discrimination, it's racism, and it needs to be called out and it needs to be legislated against, and that includes not only attitudes, people, which can only change when there's leadership from the top and from the state. That's legislation against racism in policy, in institutions, and in society.
Okay, well, look at it. First of all, or last of all, I should say, thanks to Patrick Nevin, Margaret Cash, and Kitty Holland. And I know there's a multitude of issues that we didn't get to talk about, because there are so many. Like, we didn't get to talk about the issues in Venezuela, pretext, backstop, or any of those issues that also are linked to our community. We have a world view. But unfortunately, we're in a tight position where at the moment dealing with local, national issues when it comes to traveller issues. So hopefully stay tuned, we'll be back to you guys very soon. Thank you very much.